Welcome back. All right, so as you can see, I've spent some time putting a board together for all you fine people on the internet. I've got the old TML that used to be on their sleeve that to me kind of looked like FML. I always thought, it's kind of a brave decision. And of course, their current logo and all that after they did the rebranding. And I'm wearing the reverse retro from a couple years ago, which didn't sell very well. And I'm here wearing all the Leafs garb and with Leaf stuff on the board to discuss their first 10 games this year and compare it to last season. Because I think this is important. First off, last year in their first 10 games, they played against 4 teams that made the playoffs. This year in their first 10 games, they have played 4 teams that made the playoffs last season. Now, there's the possibility Montreal could end up in the playoffs, Winnipeg could end up in the playoffs. And Ottawa, of course, is seen as one of those teams that could very well surprise everybody. So it does feel different, but to me it doesn't feel entirely different. Once we get into the numbers, we can understand, though, why the team themselves felt better last year at the 10-game mark than they do this year. So last year they were 5-4-1 after their first 10 games. Currently they're 4-4-2. So it's a 1-point difference. Last year, they ended up 54-21-7. Things were pretty good, and then the playoffs came around, and the less said about that, the better, right? But Toronto was a team that pushed Tampa Bay to the brink, and Tampa Bay takes them out in Game 7. Toronto's had problems with Game 7s. Now, yesterday, I will admit, when they lost that game against Anaheim, the first thing I said out loud was, I guess you can't lose in the first round if you don't make the playoffs. That's some galaxy brain thinking. So, but again, is it reactionary? Yes. Do I see I'm seeing a lot of articles about how they're not a contender and they're clearly not good enough and blah, blah, blah. The reality is this. So last year they started the season with a win against Montreal. This year they started the season with a loss against Montreal. So there it is. Last year Nylander scores an overtime win, or he scores the winner in the third period at 106. Campbell saved 31 out of 32. Good game for Campbell. Now, in the loss that started this season, they led 1-0 after the first. Matt Murray ends up saving 19 out of 23. So there it is. Murray sucks. All done. There you go. Game 2, they lost at the Senators 3-2. They were down 3-0 after the first. They did come back. Mrazek saved 23 out of 26, and then Campbell came in relief and saved all 10 shots. That was the last we'd see of Mrazek for a while. This year, they won Game 2. That was at home against the Capitals, 3-2. They did score first, and they ended up getting that goal that won it for them as well. Samsonov saves 24 out of 26. So, yeah, I mean, the numbers would tell you they're 1-1 after 2 games. And they were 2-1 after 3 games, both seasons, both times with wins over the Senators, both times in Toronto. Last year it was 3-1. They led 2-0 after the first. This year, it was a 3-2 win against the Sens. They were down 1-0 after the first, so it was a comeback victory. Last year, Jack Campbell saved 20 out of 21 to beat Ottawa. This year, it was Samsonov saves 26 out of 28 against those same Senators. So the records are the same. Now, they start to diverge a little bit here. They lost in Game 4, again, in overtime. I see the OT in Ottawa. Overtime against the Rangers. Panarin had the winner at 3:48. Campbell saved 21 out of 23. They lost at home against the Arizona Coyotes 4-2, and they were down 2-0 after the second. Shalgren saves 15 out of 18, and this is where famously Sheldon Keefe comes out and kind of calls out his team, right? And it's understandable. You're at home against Arizona. You should win that game. And all respect to Arizona and their work ethic being excellent. You should beat Arizona, and I think even Arizona fans would admit, yeah, they should probably have beaten us. But again, after 4 games, it's a 2-1-1 record this season and a 2-2 record during the current season. So during 21-22, 22-23, basically the same record, minus an overtime loss instead of a regulation one. Then we go into Game 5, and they lost against the Sharks 5-3 last season. They were down 3-2 after the second, and they were unable to win that game. Hutchinson saved 26 out of 30. There's a blast from the past. Well, last year. This year, they won the 5th game of the season, 3-2 in overtime against Dallas. Robertson had the winner at 3:46, so there's Nick Robertson on the board. Samsonov saves 26 out of 28. So that's kind of where things are a little bit different. Last year after the 5th game, they were 2-2-1. This year after the 5th game, they were 3-2. So a little bit of a difference, small difference, but it starts to diverge a little bit here again. They lost 7-1 at the Penguins. We all remember the 7-1 loss. They allowed 4 goals in the second period. Everybody took victory laps on the Toronto Maple Leafs and their fans that night. Campbell, 16 saves out of 21 shots. Hutchinson in relief saved 10 out of 12. And on this side of the board, that same game of the season, the Winnipeg Jets, they won 4-1 at Winnipeg. So winning 4-1 at Winnipeg, they led 3-1 after the second, and Samsonov saved 30 out of 31. So what's interesting is 6 games into the season, they were 2-3-1 last year. This year, they're 4-2. So things look good. And this is why, when the Leafs say, well, it feels different this year, I think this is probably where it feels different. Because the losing continued. In Game 7 of last season, they lost 4-1 at Carolina. They led 1-0 after the first. Jack Campbell saved 32 out of 35 that night. And so, I mean, Campbell wasn't the problem, but yeah, the numbers weren't great. This year, they lost at the Vegas Golden Knights 3-1. It was a 1-1 tie after 2. I think Toronto played well. They just didn't win it. Samsonov saved 30 out of 33. So again, last year, they're 2-4-1 through 7 games. And I remember some calls for Sheldon Keefe's job. They had lost, they had allowed 16 goals, and they'd scored 5 in those 3 games. It was a disaster. And it was a disaster where, yeah, they lost to Pittsburgh and Carolina, but that Sharks game, come on. So then they go to Chicago, and they win in overtime, 3-2. It's always a feel-good story when you win in overtime. Nylander had the winner at 1 minute and 58 seconds. Jack Campbell saved 27 out of 29. This year, they go to San Jose, and they lost in overtime 4-3 against a San Jose team that has a terrible record. Carlson with the winner at 57 seconds, and Shalgren saves 27 out of 31. Last year, they then came home, they played against the Wings, and they won 5-4. That was a crazy game. They led 2-1 after the second, and then it was just goals in the third, and I remember not having a lot of space on my board when that was all done, but it was a fun game to watch. Mrazek is back in net, 27 saves on 31 shots. Now, this season, they lost in LA against the Kings 4-2. They led 1-0 after the first. Samsonov saved 25 out of 29. So, last year, through 9 games, they were 4-4-1. This year, through 9 games, 4-4-1. Now, the 10th game, they won against the Vegas Golden Knights. They won that one 4-0. Marner with the winner at 11:31 of the first period. Campbell saves all 26 shots for the shutout. It's a feel-good story. Toronto had won 3 in a row at that stage. So they were very much a hit-and-miss team early in the season, but they were starting to hit. They won 3 in a row. This year, of course, last night in Anaheim, they lose 4-3 in overtime. At the Ducks, they led 2-1 after the first. Of course, they led 3-1 in the third period. Shalgren saves 35 out of 39. So we've seen Shalgren's name on the board 3 times, which is more than expected because Matt Murray only played the 1 game with injury. But through 10 games, last year they were 5-4-1. This year they're 4-4-2. Last year they'd scored 25 goals through 10 games. They'd allowed 29. This year they've scored 27. They've allowed 30. So their goal differential's 1 goal better than it was last season. See, in all this talk, it's just upsetting the Cats. Anyways, so yeah, it really has been remarkable, the difference between last year's narrative and this one. And that the we got to fire the coach seemed to happen earlier last year, but I'm not hearing a lot about the coach. We're hearing about the players. And when you look at the numbers aren't very good. Nylander, 4 goals and 6 assists for 10 points in 10 games. That's good. Tavares has the exact same numbers through 10 games. But then under that, you got Marner, who is underperforming at 2 goals and 7 assists for 9 points in 10 games. Marner, of course, we've seen called out by the coach, and there seems to be a bit of a break in that relationship. The one thing is, your coach is allowed to criticize your play. Coach is allowed to single you out as well. This is one of those things that I look at and think, that was standard when I was growing up watching hockey, was calling out players. I've even pointed out how in old hockey annuals, there were hockey players that would get called out for their poor play. Just in like the editorial of how the season went. Well, this guy fell apart and it all fell apart. You don't really see that now. Media doesn't want to get into that and really say, well, really, it was that guy blew it, right? So the fact that there's a coach pointing a finger right now looks really like that's something different, but I think it's a throwback. Matthews has 3 goals and 5 assists for 8 points in 10 games. That's not what you want. Riley with 7 assists in 10 games has been good at times, but he has a -5, so that's problematic. Bunting, 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 points in 10 games, playing well, but should there be somebody who's better suited to be in that top 6? If Bunting's numbers don't pick up, my answer to that would be yes. That's where Robertson, I think, comes in. He has 2 goals and 2 assists in 6 games. You got Kerfoot with a goal and 4 assists in 10 games. He's been up and down the lineup. You got Kampf, 3 goals and 1 assist, 4 points in 10 games. Bottom 6 forward. If he provides them 20 goals and this team still flounders, I don't know what more he could do. Yarncroke with 2 goals and an assist. He had a highlight reel goal last night, but it's been a mixed bag with Yarncroke, which is not surprising for people who've watched him throughout his career. Then you got Sandin. Sandin with 3 assists in 10 games. And you've got a blue line that there's been a lot of talk about Hall. And, well, they got to... And I swear, if I had a dime for every time I've seen somebody post somewhere, whether it's here on the channel or on Twitter or Facebook, got to get rid of Hall. Hall's the problem. I would be a rich man. Samsonov has a 4-2 record with a .920 save percentage. They haven't won a game when Samsonov's not the guy who gets the decision. Shalgren, 0-1-2 with an .875 save percentage. He's been okay. And again, last night he wasn't seen as the problem, but he wasn't providing with those big, huge highlight reel saves either, right? Matt Murray, just the 0-1 record, .826 save percentage, and we're waiting for Murray to come back. And this is one of the things that I said when Murray got hurt, Shalgren getting called up. I like Shalgren. I've said this before too. Your most popular players, very often your backup goaltender. I'm not going to say anything bad about Shalgren, but it does show that in terms of depth in goal, Toronto does have some issues. This is something we saw before the season started. You're betting on a bounce-back season from Samsonov, which they've got, and a bounce-back season from Murray, which they haven't. Murray's been hurt. Murray's one game, his numbers weren't fantastic, and glove side was a problem. Their power play's been good, 24.32%, no argument there. Their penalty kill, not as much, 75.68%. And their overall numbers over this alarming losing streak have not been great. So their best players haven't been the best players in the game. They're trending in the wrong direction, which again is different from last year. The records are very similar, but now they have days off to think about this and stew on it. I did watch the Leaf fan reaction from Steve Dangle. He thinks there's a move that's going to be coming. I don't know that there's going to be a big move because there's so many teams at the cap. I also think for Kyle Dubas, there's the fact that, and the quote that comes to mind all the time is, we can and we will. He is committed to this core. This core could drag Kyle Dubas right out of a job at the end of this season. This is and this is one reason why last year felt different than this year. This is the season for Kyle Dubas. So if you're of the mind that Dubas, he's got to go, he's the problem. If this team fails to reach expectations, if they fail to make the playoffs, yeah, he's gone. Sheldon Keefe's probably gone too, which I think is unfair because when I've seen Keefe angry during a game, I've been like, yep. Even the timeout last night, he was right to call that timeout when he did because they were trending in the wrong direction. Anaheim had a lot of momentum, and there was a lot of stupid passes being made. Again, it felt a lot like the Canucks earlier, about a week ago in the season. Time goes by fast, so yeah, about a week ago. But yeah, the same idea of the lazy passes, the taking it for granted, just the kind of blasé play that just drives you insane as a fan watching it. You want to see your team do well, and you're watching them go out there and just blow it against teams they should beat, which again, they did that last year too. They struggled against teams they should have beat last year. There's a loss here against Ottawa. There's a loss here against San Jose. They did win games against Chicago. They eventually won, right, in overtime. They did beat the Red Wings in an ugly game 5-4. None of these really inspired confidence, and I remember them being kind of low on the power rankings last year to start the season. This year, I gave them more of a benefit of the doubt because of the San Jose loss. Because, it was overtime, and overtime can be a bit of a crapshoot. And the win over Winnipeg was impressive and all, but that seems like ancient history now. So now they come home from that road trip, and they do need to turn things around. But I don't think the alarm bells have to be quite as loud as they are to this point, other than for the relationship between the coach and the core players. If there's a problem there, this is where Kyle Dubas and whoever else needs to come in and figure it out. One thing I said after last night's game, and I'll say it again here, the Toronto Maple Leafs beat themselves more often than other teams I've seen, and I say that as a Canuck fan. The Canucks legit take losses because they're not as talented as other teams a lot of the time. Toronto is a very talented team, and I think that while, yes, their defensive depth has been tested by these injuries that have besieged the team, this is a team that should have won more than 4 out of their first 10. This is a team that should have won, I will say, 6 of their first 10. They should have found a way to win that game last night against Anaheim, so that's 1. They should not lose against Arizona at home, so that's 2. And the frustration in the Arizona game and the Anaheim games, honestly, completely understandable why a coach would be really angry during and after those games. And so, yeah, we'll see what ends up happening. I mean, obviously, in the days before salary cap, you could just trade out a core guy. And I do think that for Kyle Dubas, a message needs to get sent at some point that failure's not acceptable. But a lot of these players have been here for a while. And so this is a storyline we've been through. The other alarming part, and I'll end on this, is that you're watching as the clock winds down in terms of you having Marner, you having Matthews. It just keeps winding down. And if this team keeps trending in this direction, it'll be harder to convince Marner or Matthews to stick around. And I mean, there's the one upside of that would be you get all kinds of cap space if those guys go somewhere else. But then you're trying to sell, bringing in veterans and figuring out what you're going to do outside of that without those guys to build around. So for Toronto, it's really important they turn this around as soon as possible. But last night was the first game last night that I've watched, and I was genuinely jaw dropped. I can't believe this. And I've seen the posts, and I saw it on last night's video with he's a Bruins fan. Why would he be, anything but happy with the Leafs? The Bruins are nowhere on this board. They play the Bruins maybe 3 times this year, maybe 4. They've had nothing to do with the Bruins in the playoffs since 2019. I don't really have that, like the rivalry hatred part. The one thing I've said is I don't feel that towards Toronto because in part you feel that anger and that hatred to the team that beat your team. And so Toronto hasn't beaten the Bruins. I don't have this hate because I'm a Bruins fan, right? That's just not there. And I've said this before and I'll say it again here. While on Steve Dangle's channel, the worse the Leafs do, the better his numbers are. For me, the better the Leafs are, the better the numbers are for me when I'm talking power rankings, when I'm talking reviews, unless it's like last night where they lose against a team they should beat and they had a lead. And so that's the alarming thing. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you could trade one guy out of the core, who would it be and why? And I get the feeling it's going to be Marner that gets mentioned the most, but let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.